Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Inventing, the only show entirely dedicated to dramatically improving the abysmal odds for the independent inventor. You know, it's 98% failure rate. So we do this by interviewing and having awesome conversations with thought leaders on innovation from small to large companies, sharing with us their tips, tricks, hacks, and stories of best practices that were used to help bring the products that we know use by every day to market. So today, my guest is Brendan Reed. Brendan, am I saying that right? Brendan finished his 26-year tenure at Procter and Gamble as a senior manager of healthcare pilot operations, providing multi-scale making innovation capabilities for P&G healthcare brands. I'm excited for this particular conversation because we met for the first time just through LinkedIn, connected, started chatting a couple weeks ago, and we had so much fun on the phone. I thought, oh my God, if only, I was recording that because It was so good talking about those best practices. So with that, I want to give everybody a big hello and encourage you, if you have any questions throughout the program, please feel free to drop them in the chat, and I will periodically address those questions as we have little breaks in our conversation. So that said, thank you so much, Brendan, for being here. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
I'm really looking forward to hearing your stories. 26 years at P&G is a long time.
You know, when
Drank
you
the Kool-Aid.
It sounds like a long time. It didn't feel like a long time.
It flew by.
Yeah, it did.
It's always interesting, and I like to typically start the program with, tell me a little bit about how you ended up in this wacky world of inventing.
Okay. Well, I'm an engineer by training, a mechanical engineer. So I got my degree out of college. I chose to go to work first in manufacturing, though, with Procter and Gamble. So of the several companies I had offers from, Procter and Gamble was very exciting just from a breadth of consumer products perspective. And I chose manufacturing because I fell in love with watching the process to make baby diapers, amazingly, baby diapers. But the complexity, the speed was just blew me away. So I started manufacturing. I, to this day, firmly believe for an engineer specifically who wants to get involved in innovation, one of the best places to start is manufacturing, just because you learn the ins and outs of making the product on a daily basis. And in doing so, in 3 years in manufacturing, I particularly have found that I'm an engineer that doesn't like dealing with other engineers' design mistakes. So that was one of the reasons that led me kind of upstream in the whole cycle. And that would be to transfer to R&D, which is what I did in my 4th year at P&G. And so I transferred originally into process development, process design and development in R&D in paper products, which is what we called it at the time, which made up baby care, family care, and fem care now. That one change then led me many different places in my career. But I started in process development and design. Like I said, that led naturally to materials development, which then led right to product design and development, and then really branched out from there to many other assignments.
So it's interesting to me because the universities don't offer just a degree in invention or innovation, right?
No.
There are some courses, and there are certainly, I think, some programs that put a heavier emphasis on it, but School of Engineering, for example, is one way that you can get in the business. But the way to move up and actually become a professional innovator is really just through the process you just described, which is kind of navigating your way through an organization and going, oh, I have an aptitude, or I really enjoy this. So inside of a large company like P&G, how does that work? Do you request it, or do they see something in you and move you into it? How does that work?
I would say it's both. It's a little bit of both. I mean, for sure, in my career, I saw people who believed that they were diehard innovators and were really keen on working upstream technology, upstream development, and they did not do well in that, and for a variety of reasons. Either because they couldn't get their mind out of downstream thinking. In other words, they kept converging on a single problem to be solved instead of the big picture of what the technology or the overall development was supposed to be, or they were constantly thinking that they were on a clock. And one thing that you and I both share is that you really can't put a timeline on innovation. I mean, when it happens, it happens. But you can't say, I'm going to develop a new product over the next 3 weeks. It's just not, you can't do that.
It'd be
And that's one
nice.
reason. Yeah, that's
I'd
one
have a lot
reason.
more products, that's for sure.
But those are a couple reasons why some people fail. So that people can request to be in that, but for sure, within P&G, you have to have a natural skill for innovation. Now, I say that, and there's many different facets of innovation, specifically at a company like Procter and Gamble, or a lot of CPG companies, or a lot of companies just focus on consumer products or services in general, and that is, we had people that were in the business innovation, but what they were really good at were those final stages of where is this new product going to go from a customer, consumer standpoint, supply chain, et cetera. And their innovation deliverables really came in the form of that downstream, getting it ready for market, and even optimizing it in market. There's some innovation involved there, especially when it comes to cost and margin, et cetera.
Mhm.
And then, of course, we had hardcore innovators. I used to kid. I used to kid some of my more upstream, call them nerdy scientists, and it's a good kind of nerdy, that they weren't allowed out of the lab because they did damage to people outside of the lab. Inside the lab, they were great, but the minute they stepped out, they were just not a sociable person. So I used to joke about that quite a bit, and but that's really the rule of life, right? People have a spectrum of skills and talents.
Sure.
The best thing to do as a leader or manager, specifically in innovation, is find where those talents and skills can best be used.
I bet you experienced that as you created systems or processes for passing the baton as you ideated and
Mhm,
innovated around certain technologies.
mhm, mhm.
When, and I want to address something that we talked about, and I'm not sure how much you're allowed to disclose publicly at this point, or
Ah, okay.
if you're not there, maybe you can just spill the beans. I don't know, but whatever you're willing and comfortable to address, I'd love to talk about innovation, success slash failure, even at a large company like P&G, so that we can learn from it. I mentioned earlier the 98% failure rate for the independent
Right,
inventor. My
right.
understanding from the studies that I've seen, as little as 75%, as high as 85 to 90% failure rate, even within large organizations like P&G, who have the
Mhm,
budgets and the people, the resources, the experience. It can still fail. Still
mhm.
risky business. So, can you tell me just a little bit about what best practices worked that whether they worked or not, that you found to be most effective anyway in ideating and innovating solutions for the consumer?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of them. Some of the responses I would give to that question are, when it comes to best practices, for sure, the ideas that immediately wowed people
Wow.
uh, within the company, and then externally as we talked with consumers, and then of course when we went to the customers, the Walmart, Costco, Target, et cetera. When we were able to show a product or a new idea, and you instantly had that wow, you didn't have to explain why this is a big deal, right? That's obviously one of the major success
Good
factors. And
test. Yeah.
it's one of those things I really feel like most of the time you know it when you see it. I mean, I recall early in the days of a product like Swiffer.
Uh-huh.
So at that point, my job on that was I was part of the process development team. So there were people who had the idea, and they had made some ham samples in a lab and had tinkered around with it for I think almost a year, with the concept and getting the material structure right, et cetera. And then they came to somebody like me at that time and said, how are we going to make this on a large scale? And in doing so, we also changed the product a little bit. But I remember the first time I showed it to some friends of mine outside the company. And the first response by some people were, well, that didn't really didn't do dusting on a general basis anyway. You could tell by they weren't really blown away. But when you showed it to somebody whose daily or weekly activities included dusting, they were just, this is awesome. I love this. This is such a great product, right? So that wow factor was there right away.
Sure.
Within a big company like a P&G, I never really saw any kind of tracking of success and failure rate. For sure, we had our failures, but one of the other key um, ways that things could be successful at a company like P&G was to just have your data in order. I mean, right? There were always those product designers who came in with this prototype, and they said, "This is great because I think that it's great." And I'd say, "Hey, John, that's great that you think that it's great, but what are 10,000 consumers going to feel about it?" Uh, and I would always almost constantly put on my cost and margin hat and say, if consumers want it, that's definitely a pull, but what is Walmart, Target, and now obviously Amazon going to think about it? What's their angle going to be? What's their margin? Do they have exclusivity, et cetera?
Mhm.
um, but then going back to your original question, I mean, one of the major areas that a big company like a P&G fails in innovation. And I don't know if I'd always call it a failure as much as it's not as successful as it could be, is on speed. So ideas come and the marketplace is constantly changing. You're not always first out there, but if you get out there relatively quickly, there's still money to be made and consumers to be gained.
Mhm.
And speed is typically where a big company loses the most,
Mhm.
because when you have a brand, if you have a new product that's going to be tied to an existing brand, your sense of risk goes to almost zero. So you're going to test and test and test and test, and before you know it, you have 13 knockoff brands out there that are underselling. So that's the risk. That's the challenge with a big company, is speed on innovation.
Mhm. You bring up a good point. So which is interesting considering the budgets are there, but
Hmm.
they become less risk tolerant
Absolutely.
the bigger the brand. It almost is, it goes against what I would naturally believe.
Right, right,
Um,
right. It is, but I mean, I saw it time and time during my career that, I look back to, a great example is with Crest, early in the days when I was first in oral care, the speed at which a new idea could come out, if it was going to be under the 3D white brand, say, so to speak, the risk tolerance was very, 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 very close to zero. And so the amount of testing we had to do to prove it. And if you look at Procter and Gamble's innovation in a product like toothpaste over the past, call it 5 to 6 years, there are, trying to think real quickly off the top of my head, I could probably think about two of maybe 100 new product innovations that were uniquely an idea developed within P&G. The other 98 were trends in the marketplace, beauty trends like charcoal, activated charcoal, et cetera, or beauty trends like some of your essential oils like spearmint oil and mint oil, et cetera. All of those were trends that were already in the marketplace, and the folks at Crest picked up on them and went to put them in toothpaste and put them out there. And it's hard to measure this, but my argument would be, if we would have been significantly faster, there was a lot more market share to gain. And so consequently, many of those new ideas have launched and then been discontinued right away.
wow. So on the spectrum, P&G started off and even became the powerhouse that they became as a result of their disruptive, very
Mhm,
innovative
mhm,
culture.
mhm.
And somewhere along the line, it kind of transitioned more into a fast follower
Well,
methodology.
it depends on the business, right? I mean, I would certainly look at something like Fabric Care with Tide. They are still the leader. I mean,
Hmm.
not only just are gargantuan in the marketplace, but they almost always lead the trends, whether it's cold water washing or with some of the additional additives like Febreze, or they've mixed their scents between Tide and Gain, et cetera, in order to grow the popularity of the Gain fragrances.
Hmm.
They've mixed in Downy. I mentioned Febreze already. I think Tide's already still leader in there. It, in some businesses like an oral care, have become more trailers, more market followers. There are certainly efforts afoot to get out in front, and there are examples where when I was there, we were successful at being market leaders in some of our products. Um, but there's more opportunity for that than the risk tolerance sometimes allows.
Mm. Is there an example of a time where you were absolutely certain something was going to be a huge success and it didn't quite pay off?
Two. I can think of two. The most recent. So I'm not sure if yourself or anybody watching are familiar with the Crest sensitivity strips. Obviously, everyone knows the white strips, the whitening strips. Um, when I first was transferred to or was coming into oral care, this is in 2014, the development for taking one of those strips and putting sensitivity gel, sensitivity treatment on the strip was about halfway through the development. And, I sat in many of the initial market surveys and some of the consumer testing to see some consumers' reaction, and having people in my own family that have tooth sensitivity. I was convinced that these strips were going to be huge, because essentially if you have tooth sensitivity to like cold water or ice cream or even hot, you can put one of these strips on, and for most consumers, it removes your sensitivity for a couple of weeks. I mean, a couple.
Wow.
Um, and a variety of problems came about. Number one, the full-scale manufacturing of the strips was having some problems, some quality problems, and also some production capacity problems. The initial market launch prediction was uh, way overestimated. So we made a lot more strips than actually started moving.
Sure.
Um, and it is just fraught with massive problems. I still believe the product itself is a fundamental game changer if you have sensitivity. But we ran into a couple of problems: the quality and capacity problems I mentioned, but then the fundamental problem of putting one of these strips on sucks. I mean, if you've got these white strips, it's like you start putting it on and it slides around and you get this gunk all over your fingers. And so consequently, sensitivity development, the technology that was in this strip is still, prevalent at P&G. I mean, the people that invented that technology, they know their stuff. They know what they're doing. And they are now working on other means to apply that for the same consumer.
Application.
Yeah.
What were some of the bigger, one or two of the biggest takeaways, learnings for you from that in hindsight, that all of those different things that went sideways?
Yeah, a couple of things. Number one is, I spent a lot of time on that product, on that project, going back in time and talking to some of the market analysts, and some of the original business analysts that had predicted what the market was going to be. And the fundamental issue was they spent too much time talking to consumers who had a big problem with sensitivity, and when they were only focused on, does this product fix your sensitivity, and the answer was unanimous yes, and they took that and turned it into these business estimates that were way too huge, because they forgot to ask the second most important question: is okay, this product works for your sensitivity, will you buy it? And that would have drilled down into, well, no, because it's hard to put on, it's gunky, it's inconvenient, I won't remember to do that, and then the strips themselves were kind of costly. So I think if they would have spent some more time drilling into why, will you buy this? And if so, why not? We could have uncovered some of those issues. So not enough penetration of the real, how consumers were really going to use it.
Interesting.
We, everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people in consumer products these days know of, a fundamental truth in that if you ask consumers about a certain thing, they will unanimously say yes, but then they won't put their money behind it. A great example is if you ask consumers, would you like, you could pick your product. Would you like a shampoo that had zero environmental footprint? They all say yes.
Sure.
Yes. Put it in a bottle and you put it for the same price next to another product, and they're not just going to gravitate towards yours because it has environmental footprint. If the product next to it has a coupon or store promotion, they're taking that. They could care less about the environmental footprint. So
That's
you have to
interesting.
spend a lot of time really understanding from consumers, not only does the product work for you, but will you buy it? That
Sure.
was one of the big learnings. The second one was, I think that there was not enough planning put into the full-scale production issues. And that led to not only some initial quality issues, but also that drove parts of the cost of the product, which then spilled over into the consumer problem as well.
Mm-hmm. So it's fascinating that even a large company faces the exact same challenge that the independent inventor, right?
Probably even more challenges
Yeah.
because here's one benefit of the independent inventor. The independent inventor typically has themselves or a small team to really progress down the invention pipeline. And while that may seem scary, trust me, it's a lot less frustrating than having people coming out of the woodwork that don't like the way you're doing something, or they don't like the new form in which your idea is coming in. So you have fewer naysayers outside of a big company, and naysayers who are typically people with zero risk tolerance are usually what get in the way the most of a big company.
Yeah. So when I was working, so Richard Hasnot
Mm-hmm.
is the founder of Innovate to Grow Experts. In fact, I had him on the program. It was one of the first, it was either the first or second program I
Mm-hmm.
did. And there were some serious technical issues, which frustrates me. So I'm gonna have him back. But, and he was, his team helped with the Swiffer as well. One of the things that I really appreciate from his teachings as he works with clients is, and everybody, I think it's overused, that wow factor that you mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But the way that he tells a story is that in order to get people to make a switch from their current solution, whether it's a sock on their hand to dust down the baseboard, right?
Right.
Or so it's free, or it's a brand that they know and love, like Tide. If
Mm-hmm.
you want someone to make a switch, which is a behavioral change you're asking them to make, you have to give them enough highly meaningful benefits that all add up to a dramatic difference to make the switch. And
Agreed. Yeah.
how many benefits begs the question, well, okay, how many benefits is that?
Right.
It's relative. It
Right.
could be 1, it could be 10. It just has to be enough is
Yeah.
the answer, right?
Right.
And as independent inventors, I don't know how companies, large organizations like P&G do it, but we need to do a better job of not just asking, will you buy it,
Mm-hmm.
but actually testing with real sales, not just friends and family, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Real sales. And then whether that's a get on our pre-order list before
Right.
you manufactured it to test it.
Right.
Direct response companies. I don't know if you've ever worked.
Mm-hmm.
Did you do so DR, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's the 1-800 call to order yours now commercials. In direct response, products are tested with basically a dummy site, a real quick and dirty infomercial, and a million emails sent out, soliciting the product, getting people to put in their card, but not actually charging them if there is no inventory, right?
Right. Right.
That's a real world test.
Right. Right.
What kind of advice or what suggestions could you make for how people could get more answers to that challenge?
Right. So, the challenge is what you speak about is something that big companies, like P&G, and my most direct experiences with P&G the last few years has really started to extend the use of these transactional learning experiments,
Yes.
where
I like that phrase.
you
I'll write
offer
it down.
you offer a product at a price point that you think is where you want to put it in the market, and you ask people, to use it or buy it. Sometimes you incentivize them a little bit with a little lower price, and you're really getting a real world look at how will they use it? Does it work for them? What benefits does it have? And going back to my point earlier, will they really buy it? So the challenge for the small or the independent inventor is a big company has the deep pockets to pull off things like these transactional learning experiments, or TLEs is what they call them within P&G. And I've over the past couple of months, I've talked to some other big companies, big CPG companies on it, and this topic has come up a couple of times, and they have different terms for it, but it's essentially the same thing. Some companies are using those with only employees. Some companies are using those in small markets. I know P&G uses those TLEs in markets all around the country. The challenge with the small inventors, you don't have those deep pockets, right? So how could you replicate that? And frankly, depending on your product, that you should look at opportunities for where do people go to sell things. Of course, you can do it virtually. You put it, you can put it on a website or pre-order yours, or maybe get a DR company to help you out. But another way, depending on your product, is set up a booth or a stand somewhere, at a farmer's market.
Right.
Farmers markets are awesome, right? It's Saturday morning. People are, they're out, they're usually in a good mood. They're always free and open with their opinions. Could you do something like that? Can you set up a little booth or kiosk at the mall? I mean, trust me, kiosk prices at malls are going nowhere but down because foot traffic is down. So it's probably not that cost prohibitive, but those are some ideas that you can get at the exact same point, but on a much smaller scale.
It's funny that you use the kiosk example, because when I was on Shark Tank, that was the illustration that I made for the sharks.
Yeah.
The business case was me getting a cart around the holidays,
Yeah.
and selling them at different price points, testing the market and seeing where it would land. And I even joked about working very long hours, because you have to be open for the entire mall hours. And during the holidays, they're longer, they're extended hours. So I put in some hella days.
Really?
But the learnings were invaluable.
It's an idea to do it that way, though. I mean, it's a great real world test. Absolutely.
It is. Now, and you can do that when you have a product to sell.
Right.
For folks who can't go injection mold or whatever it's going to take to actually build it, the Kickstarters and stuff theoretically could work, but the problem with the crowdfunding business model is that it's changed so much that the only way to get noticed is to spend $10,000 or $20,000 to get noticed, which if you had the money, you wouldn't need a Kickstarter in the first place, right?
Right.
So most people don't understand that.
Right. But, there's something to be said. So during my career at P&G for a couple of years, I led the company's prototyping efforts. So, we prototype different products, everything from, we'll make one or two hand samples of a feminine pad or a baby diaper, or we may make 1,000 dummy handles for a new Oral-B brush, and so I took over a prototyping group. There were several different groups around the company, and brought them all together to really try to leverage some scale and some knowledge between them, because we had people that were great mold makers and people that were fantastic ideators, and then we had some groups that had laser printers and CNC machines and digital printers, and some groups that could use all that stuff when they were down. So they were needing that kind of equipment. So, but those 2 years really showed me that when you're talking about a product that people are going to use, specifically if they're going to somehow handle it in the use process, you really can't get away from physically putting it in their hand to get them to really go for it.
So let's talk about that for a moment. Hand samples. We have 3D printing, so you can do these, at least depending on the materials, if you can print something with rapid prototyping and that sort of thing. How do you create a hand sample, for example, of a new diaper that's going to have certain materials that for an inventor, especially, you couldn't go pull off the shelf or whatever?
Right.
How do you do that?
Well, I mean, I will tell you how we did it. We made it by hand. So hot glue guns, scissors, and rolls of the test material, and just cutting the sizes we want. I personally, hot glued parts of diapers together. We even had a seamstress on the staff of the prototyping group that could hand make this stuff and knit things together, even though that's not how the diapers are made, but it, functionally still works the same way.
Getting your proof of concept.
There's no limit to if you can build it out of something on your workbench at home, you can have a prototype and you can show it around.
You mentioned doing something like that at home.
Oh yeah,
Your own refrigerator.
My inventions at home almost always fail. I'm still working on it. So yeah. Although I think since I talked to you, so my soda can dispenser.
Yeah.
Because I was tired of the soda cans always spilling out of the refrigerator. That was kind of a fail. My tolerances were too tight. Learning, we'll go back and make it again. But I did have a success since I talked to you a few weeks ago. Was I'm on this mission to use all the extra scrap lumber I have in the house. After, since leaving P&G, I took a little bit of a summer sabbatical and built some furniture for my oldest daughter's going away to college. I have a lot of scrap wood. I'm on a mission to use all the scrap wood for useful purposes. So I built some shelves in the garage to hold all of our camp chairs we use for soccer matches and outdoor sporting events and stuff like that. And that was actually a success. One of my daughters commented that they looked nice. That's a success.
That's a big win.
Yeah.
The daughter especially. The
Yeah.
son goes, yeah, whatever. But when the daughter says it looks good,
Yeah.
that's
nice.
big,
Yeah.
big time. Any last pieces of advice that you could give us for creative? So for our audience sake, first of all, we'll just address the difference in a working model and non-working model, a prototype versus a hand sample, for example.
Right.
Just kind of outlining very quickly what the differences are, and then any other creative tips, tricks, or hacks you could give us for whatever we're thinking about doing.
Tips and tricks. The big thing is if you have an idea, and if it is a product, I definitely am a huge fan of having early stage prototypes, and you move from non-functional to functional prototypes, then finished type of things. And that's the scale you move along as you're learning, right? Mm-hmm. I can't stress enough. It's important to have something like that. And I wouldn't overthink making those first few prototypes, right? Because people can spend a lot of time trying to optimize a prototype when all you really need is you just need that MVP at the moment, that minimum
viable product. Exactly.
Yeah. The other thing is if you have an idea and an invention, there are some people that naturally, I think we talked about this when we discussed a few weeks ago, you have some people that naturally go to the 98th step and they see a problem and they're like, oh, well, we can't move forward. And, I would urge you, if you're on step 3, it's perfectly fine to think about step 98. But if you identify a problem, write it down. And let's start thinking about when we get around step 80, because otherwise you're going to shut down a lot of your original ideas because you're afraid that X is going to happen in the future. And what you might find is in the steps in between, especially if you're working with a prototype, you may change your product to where that problem you identified no longer comes to fruition. So don't stop early is another advice I would give.
Would you ever build prototypes in that really early stage out of just random material? Like, so for example, I'm working on something and it's going to be metal at some point, but I can't fabricate metal. So I might be able to shape it out of balsa wood or whatever.
Yes. And in fact, I think if you read some of the products that we handle iPhone is a perfect example. I mean, some of the original prototypes that I've seen pictures of were certainly out of wood, molded clay, et cetera. I mean, car manufacturers are still using clay models in a lot of regards.
Yeah.
So certainly using alternative materials is fine, because if it's a product that people are going to hold in their hand, like a toothbrush or a hairbrush or even a new shaped water bottle, you're looking for that tactile functionality of it. So the materials, while they will be important in the future for sure, it may not be immediately important. So I wouldn't stress over that.
Wow, so much good information. Any parting thoughts on, as you go out there, final thoughts?
Well, one of the things that I think my frustrations in my last few years at P&G is something I would urge people, and that is, we live in an era where people have never been so willing to give you their opinion. I mean, just look at social media, right? They've never been so willing to give your opinion, and they can do so at the speed of their fingertips. And so if you are looking for ideas, or if you have an idea and you're looking for consumer responses, sure, talking to people one-to-one is still paramount and important. But don't underestimate the value of being able to put pictures out there, or a video of your product, and try to solicit some response digitally, because it will come, at light speed, literally. And you can get a lot of great feedback very, very quickly. So that's one thing that I would urge people to do, is just keep in mind the time we're in of people's willingness to give you their data for free a lot of times.
Yeah. What's next for you?
That's a good question.
Put you on the spot.
I am still
Are you
talking
for
to a lot of
hire?
people. Say again.
Are you for hire? If somebody
Uh,
wanted to work with you, if they had an invention or something that maybe lines up with your background, would they reach out?
Absolutely. I spend a lot of my days talking to people now about opportunities and possibilities, working with a few small startups here and there, and also talking with some larger companies. I'm always happy to have a conversation with people. It could turn into a partnership. It could turn into a great success. It could turn into, oh, he was some guy I talked to once.
Yeah,
It's all
or an introduction to somebody else or whatever. Yeah,
absolutely,
either way.
absolutely. And the other thing is, 26 years of P&G. I know a lot of people there. I know a lot of people in many of the industries that I worked in, and I'm happy to make that connection if it works for you.
So I would encourage anybody who might be interested in speaking with Brendan to look at his profile first on LinkedIn so you can get a
Mhm.
better idea of what his background expertise is so that you don't inundate him with emails or something that maybe aren't even a good fit in the first place. Brendan,
Uh,
can you go ahead and spell your first and last name for everybody? I mean, it's easy, but go ahead. So
sure. First name is Brendan, Brendan, and my last name is Reed, Reed.
yep. So look him up on LinkedIn and you can do a connection request that way. And I'm sure then you all can decide if you want to chat offline. Um, Brendan, I really appreciate this. I actually have something that I'm working on that I think will rival the Swiffer. So maybe I should have
Oh,
a
awesome.
conversation with you about it.
That's good.
I
That's
think it
good.
would
That
be a
sounds like
lot
a
of
great
fun to
idea.
chat
Okay.
about offline. I'm not going to tell anybody here, but
And I
just
think
between me and you.
I think you saw earlier you have a cat, so you have a great test market for dusting innovation.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. For those of you who joined us throughout the program, you're welcome to drop any last minute questions in here. I'll be only on here for a few more seconds, but drop your questions in. If we can get them answered right now, we will. If not, you can check back and watch this program if you missed any part or would like to re-listen, rewatch our program tonight. You can check that out online at lloydmarketinggroup.com. You can also subscribe if you'd like to be updated, notified of future programs, and not just here on Invent Tank, but anything else that's going on that I think might be helpful for all y'all as you go through your journey in this process from concept to market. Uh, Next week is Halloween, so I'm actually going to take next week off. But please sign up if you haven't already for the newsletter, so we can let you know when the next. The next one will be the following Thursday. But who our next guest is going to be? I look forward to seeing you all again. Brendan, thank you again so much for your time. I wish you all well. Have a wonderful evening, and I'll see you in a couple weeks.
All right. Talk to you later.
Thanks, Brendan.